I had been looking forward to this solo camping trip for what felt like forever. No people, no noise, just me in the wilderness. It was supposed to be a perfect getaway, a chance to disconnect from everything and recharge. I chose a national park known for its remoteness, far enough that cell service was non-existent. After hours of driving, I finally reached the trailhead and hiked a short distance to a spot that seemed untouched by anyone. Secluded, just like I wanted, nestled right by a still, dark lake, with a thick wall of trees surrounding it. I was running against the clock, though. The sun was already sinking behind the trees, casting these long, twisted shadows that made the forest feel different. I could feel the temperature drop as the light faded, so I rushed to get my tent up and build a fire. The crackling flames, the occasional splash of the lake's water, it was peaceful. The kind of peace you don't realize you miss until you're in the middle of nowhere, miles away from anyone. But as the fire flickered and the darkness swallowed the last of the daylight, something shifted. The forest went dead. No wind. No insects. No animals. Just pure silence. I'd been camping before, and yeah, forests can go quiet, but not like this. This was heavy. Suffocating. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was nothing. Maybe I was too used to the constant hum of city life, and the silence out here just felt unnerving. I kept repeating that to myself, that it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it, like the air itself had changed, thicker somehow. But I wasn't ready to face that yet, so I stayed by the fire, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling creeping up my spine. I don't know how long I'd been asleep by the fire, but I woke up suddenly, feeling the chill of the night seep into my bones. My sleeping bag had shifted, and for a moment, everything felt eerily still. That's when I heard it, a faint noise slicing through the silence. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees. But then I listened harder, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't the wind. It was whispering. I sat up, heart racing, straining to catch the words. It felt like the voices were circling around me, sneaking through the dark, just out of sight. My flashlight flickered, and I quickly turned the beam around the campsite, my palms sweaty against the cold metal. But all I found was the inky blackness of the forest. Nothing. Just shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that it was all just the wind playing tricks on my mind. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent. They felt close. It was as if something, or someone, was right behind me, lurking in the dark. I whipped around, adrenaline pumping, but once again, there was nothing. Just me in the oppressive silence. But I knew I wasn't truly alone. The air was thick with unease, and I could feel a prickle on the back of my neck, like 1,000 tiny needles digging in. My heart pounded in my chest, the whispers morphing into soft, unintelligible murmurs, like a chorus of voices desperately trying to convey something. I could barely breathe, and all I wanted was to escape this suffocating feeling. But where could I go? It was pitch black outside my little circle of light, and I was miles away from civilization. I tried to focus, to clear my head, but the voices only grew louder, weaving in and out of my thoughts, creating a symphony of dread that was impossible to ignore. I picked up a stick from the ground, clutching it like a lifeline, ready to defend myself against whatever was out there. I could feel my heart hammering, and every instinct screamed at me to pack up and run. But the fire crackled in front of me, offering a small comfort against the unknown lurking in the shadows. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I noticed was how strange everything felt. My watch, my trusty companion that had counted down the hours of my camping trip, was gone. I checked my wrist, half convinced I had just slept in an odd position, but it was definitely not there. I immediately reached for my phone, but it was dead, despite the fact that I had charged it fully before leaving. Panic started to creep in, but the most unsettling part? The sun hung high in the sky, almost blinding, but it felt like I had only just drifted off a couple of hours after dawn. It was as if I had slept through the entire morning without even realizing it. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was just the stress from that weird night filled with whispers. I needed to clear my head, so I decided to go for a hike, thinking maybe the fresh air and sunshine would help reset my mind. But as I walked deeper into the woods, the feeling that something was very, very wrong settled in the pit of my stomach. The trees, tall and looming, felt like they were leaning in closer, almost as if they were watching me. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement just out of the corner of my eye. I would whip around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just the same dense woods, suffocatingly still. After a couple of hours of forcing myself to breathe through the mounting dread, I decided it was time to head back to camp. I retraced my steps, but the unease continued to gnaw at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The quiet of the forest felt thick and heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. But that's when I noticed something chilling. As I approached my campsite, I scanned the ground for my footprints, but they were gone, completely erased, as if I had never walked that path in the first place. The ground was smooth and undisturbed, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my mind. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my spine. No signs of animals or even wind had disturbed the earth, just an eerie, blank slate where my tracks should have been. I stopped dead in my tracks, panic washing over me like a cold wave. I looked around, my breath quickening as I felt the oppressive weight of the trees closing in. It was impossible. I had just been here, hadn't I? My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. Maybe I was just disoriented, but deep down, I felt an unsettling truth. Something in these woods didn't want me to leave. Something had taken my time, my path, and maybe even my sanity. As I turned back toward my campsite, I heard it again, the soft, whispering voices, echoing through the trees, this time more insistent. They were calling me, beckoning me deeper into the woods. I took a shaky step forward, feeling the pull of the forest like a dark magnet, but my instinct screamed for me to turn back. Back at the campsite, I tried to shake off the growing dread by focusing on practical things, gathering wood, checking my gear, and trying to convince myself that everything was fine. I needed to distract myself from the creeping anxiety, but the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the air itself was thick with something unseen. With every rustle of the leaves or snap of a twig, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was unsettling, a feeling like someone, or something, was out there, just beyond the trees. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I noticed how fast night fell. It was as if the darkness swooped in, devouring the last remnants of daylight. I stayed close to the fire, its flickering flames offering a false sense of security, but deep down, I felt uneasy. The forest was too quiet, too still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then I saw it, a figure, lurking between the trees, just out of the firelight. My heart skipped a beat as I squinted to make sense of what I was seeing. It was tall, unnaturally so, with long limbs that seemed to stretch into the shadows. I couldn't make out a face, it was like it was obscured by darkness itself, blending perfectly with the night. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, rooted in place, staring at this entity that stood silently, watching me. It felt like an eternity, my heart hammering in my chest, the pulse echoing in my ears. I reached for my flashlight, hands trembling as I aimed the beam at the figure. But as the light hit it, I realized with a growing horror that it didn't seem to penetrate the darkness surrounding it. It was as if the shadows were alive, absorbing the light, swallowing it whole. Panic surged through me as I flicked the flashlight off and on, my mind racing with desperate thoughts. What was it? Was it even real? I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, a silent sentinel in the night. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. One moment it was there, its long limbs casting eerie shadows against the trees, and the next, nothing. I felt a rush of cold air sweep through the campsite, extinguishing the warmth of the fire. I blinked rapidly, half expecting it to reappear, but all I could see were the trees swaying gently, as if mocking my fear. The stillness was deafening. I strained to hear any sign of movement, but it was as if the forest had swallowed all sound. My heart raced as the realization hit me. Whatever that thing was, it was out there, lurking just beyond the reach of my firelight, waiting for me to let my guard down. The weight of the night pressed in around me, and I scrambled to gather my things, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here, away from this cursed place. But as I moved, the rustling began again, deliberate and slow, creeping closer. I turned, my eyes darting around the campsite, but there was nothing, just the oppressive darkness surrounding me. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft and chilling, carried on the wind. "Stay," it urged, echoing through the trees, wrapping around me like a cold, clammy hand. I shivered, feeling the fear clawing at my insides. I was not alone, and whatever was out there wanted me to stay. But I knew I had to leave before it was too late. I couldn't stay there any longer. Panic gripped me like a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs as I scrambled to pack my things. The shadows felt alive, creeping closer with every hurried movement. I stuffed my gear into my backpack as fast as I could, my hands shaking, and took a deep breath before setting off toward the trail that led back to my car. I could almost taste freedom, but the thought only made the dread deepen. As I began hiking, I felt like I was walking through a nightmare. No matter how far I walked, the trail didn't seem to lead anywhere. It was like I was trapped in a bizarre loop, constantly returning to the same spot by the lake, which looked even more sinister in the dim light. The trees loomed over me, casting twisted shadows that seemed to mock my fear. I tried to shake it off, choosing a new direction each time, but the results were always the same. I was ensnared in this cursed forest. That's when I heard the whispers again, louder now, like they were burrowing into my mind. It was maddening. The figure appeared once more, closer this time, standing just at the edge of the trees. Its presence was suffocating, an oppressive weight that pressed down on my chest. And then, as it stepped forward, I realized it wasn't alone. Other shapes began to emerge, more figures, more shadows, surrounding me like a pack of wolves ready to pounce. Fear propelled me forward, and I ran as fast as I could, heart pounding, legs screaming in protest. But the whispers followed, echoing in my ears, growing louder and more insistent. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I fell hard onto the forest floor, the impact jolting through my body. Panic surged, and I struggled to get up, but as I did, I saw them closing in, the dark figures gliding through the trees with an eerie grace. My breath quickened as I pushed myself to my feet. That's when I heard it clearly for the first time, a voice that cut through the cacophony of whispers. It was low and distorted, reverberating through the air, and it spoke one word, "Stay." The sound resonated deep within me, wrapping around my mind like a vice. Everything around me began to fade to black, the trees melting away, the ground slipping from under my feet. I felt an overwhelming pull, a force dragging me toward the shadows, toward the figures that lurked just beyond the edge of the darkness. I was powerless to resist. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that shattered the silence of the night, but it was swallowed by the darkness, leaving me isolated in my despair. The last thing I remember was the suffocating weight of those whispering shadows, drawing me in, engulfing me in their cold embrace. I was no longer running, I was lost, swallowed by the very nightmares I had tried so desperately to escape. And then, there was nothing. I woke up in the middle of the woods, disoriented and alone, the crisp air biting at my skin. Panic washed over me as I tried to gather my thoughts. The campsite was gone, the lake, the trees, everything I had known was simply erased. It was as if I had been plucked from reality and dropped somewhere else entirely, like a ghost wandering in a world that had forgotten me. I staggered back toward the road, every step heavy with dread, where my car sat untouched, gleaming under the afternoon sun, as if I had never left it. Relief washed over me for a brief moment, but it quickly turned sour. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling, and started the engine. I told myself it was just a nightmare, a hallucination, an elaborate trick of my tired mind. But every time I close my eyes, I see them. The figures, tall and gaunt, their faces shrouded in shadow, standing just beyond the tree line. I can still hear the rustling, the deliberate way they moved through the woods, as if they were stalking me, waiting for the right moment to strike. As I drove, a gnawing sense of unease crept in. No matter how far I went, I felt their presence lingering at the edges of my mind. I had tried to leave the area multiple times, but each time, I found myself back here, like the woods had become a maze that refused to let me escape. The world around me morphed in a way that felt wrong, distorted, like I was living in a waking nightmare that wouldn't end. Days turned into weeks, and my sense of time slipped away, blending into a haze of anxiety and dread. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the whispers started to come back, soft and beckoning, weaving through my thoughts like an insidious melody. It was maddening. I found myself sitting alone in my car, staring blankly at the trees, listening as the voices seemed to echo my name. Stay, they would whisper, teasing me, taunting me with the promise of something just out of reach. I'd shake my head, trying to drown them out, but it was impossible. I was drawn to those woods, as if they held the answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask. One night, I made the mistake of sleeping in my car, hoping to escape the haunting visions. But I woke to a loud thud outside. My heart raced as I glanced out the window, and that's when I saw them, the figures, standing in a perfect line along the tree line, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I could hear the whispers now, louder and more insistent, clawing at the edges of my sanity. It felt like a warning, a final message that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And in that moment, I knew deep down, they were waiting for me. They wouldn't let me go. No matter how far I drove, no matter how many times I tried to escape, the woods were my prison, and the figures were my jailers. I was trapped in a twisted game that I could never win. Now, as I sit here typing this, the whispers have grown louder, more demanding. I can feel them closing in, and I know it's only a matter of time before I'm pulled back into their world. I can't ignore it any longer. The darkness is calling, and I think it wants me to return. I can hear them. I can feel them. And soon, I won't be able to resist.